I have a question for Dr. Andrew Lemon. Dr. Lemon, can anti-competitive conduct occur within a blockchain? In other words, could a group of blockchain users conspire to gain advantage over other users of the blockchain?
So, Sal, that's a great question. And I think some of these ideas in that question were touched on by Dr. Zhang, but I think it goes to the heart of the consensus mechanism. So a lot of these blockchains, the consensus mechanism requires competition amongst the record keepers. And so if you looked at, say, Bitcoin, those record keepers are the miners who are validating these transactions. If you get enough computing power as a record keeper, and say you've got more than 50% of the computing power, then the consensus mechanism becomes susceptible to manipulation. And so you could manipulate the the validation process and record information into the blockchain that's not accurate, that's false. And so in that sense, a collusive arrangement amongst record keepers could adulterate the quality of the information in the blockchain. And I think that's kind of touches on some of the issues involved in the United Corp v. Bitmain case that Jackie touched on. When these kind of disputes happen about the accuracy of the information in the blockchain, it'll create what Dr. Zhang was talking about a fork. So you've got two different sets of now distributed ledgers with competing sets of information. So I do think that there is an ability, these technologies, at the heart of them, they require some level of competition amongst the record keepers, no matter how you define the consensus mechanism. If it's really going to be this sort of open, decentralized approach that Dr. Zhang spoke about, it requires sort of competition. And so if you adulterate the competition, you can cause trouble.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. We have a question for one of our attendees here, and this goes to the entire group, so whoever wants to go first, and you can all weigh in. What happens if one government issues an order to cease because they find a certain blockchain is used for cartel purposes? Is it possible for an agency to prosecute an anti-competitive agreement over blockchain?
It's Jackie. I think I can weigh in on that, but if I could ask you to read back the question again, I'm not sure that I got it.
Sure. The question is this: what happens if one government issues an order to cease because they find that a certain blockchain is used for cartel purposes? Is it possible for an agency to prosecute an anti-competitive agreement over blockchain?
Yes, I think so. So I'll be interested to see what the other panelists have to say. But for sure, the blockchain is subject to cartel enforcement, and I think that if the government finds that the blockchain has been used for cartel purposes, is no bar to them prosecuting. What do you guys think?
So this is go ahead, Dr. Zhang.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I think this question is about the quick rule of thumb on the Reddit. Is about if you can sue it, it's not decentralized. So if that blockchain is a decentralized blockchain like a Bitcoin, no government has the power to stop it or to regulate it because you simply cannot find the company or whatever organization behind it, and the nodes, the network is distributed all over the places. So there's no way for government to regulate it. But if the blockchain in question is not a decentralized blockchain, for example, if it's an enterprise blockchain maintained by a company, then certainly the regulators can work on it.
Dr. Lemon, would you like to weigh in?
Yep.
Sure. So just at the outset, it sounds like a question that's calling for a legal opinion, and I'm not an attorney, but as an economist who's done a lot of antitrust work, if I were to play an amateur attorney here, it would seem to me that if if some foreign government or any government, I guess, determined that the participants of a blockchain were engaged in some kind of anti-competitive cartel activity, as an economist, I would think that, well, then the users of that blockchain have been engaging in anti-competitive conduct. And so I would definitely think that that would make them ripe targets for some kind of legal action.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so that's what I was getting at earlier, saying that I think permissioned private blockchains are much more susceptible to both civil and here potential cartel and even, criminal enforcement. One thing that I think is really interesting about blockchain is that the blockchain itself can be evidence of what is happening. So here you have a regulator that would have complete access to all of the data that's been admittedly verified in like basically perfect data that we don't usually see in the world, but everybody as part of the blockchain agrees that it's great data and can go back and do like a time series or study over time about when certain information was being contributed to the blockchain and then correlating that to reality, market reality about when a certain competitor increased prices. So it's a very, kind of more robust set of data than you would typically see. And so I definitely think that the data itself can be used against the participants. And I think it's more in the context of the permissioned private blockchain for sure. That's definitely an area of risk and something that needs to be guarded against for people that are, creating those types of blockchains.
We have a first question. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I'll just add. I think there's a distinction between the blockchain and the users. Dr. Zhang makes a fair point. Like, you can't sue the technology. So if there's a decentralized blockchain, you can't sue that, but you can certainly, I would think, go after the participants, the users of that.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Sorry.
Go ahead. Finish the thought. Go ahead.
Okay. So yes, I totally agree with that. But the issue with like decentralized blockchains, most of the time you don't know who is the user. So that's also another difficulty faced by the regulator. Because although if it's open blockchain, all the data are there, so you can access the data. But I believe for the most important data, people will encrypt it. And once the data is encrypted, it's a one-way trip, and it's very difficult to crack that encryption. So, that also adds more difficulty to the regulators facing a blockchain. Yeah.
All right. If we're any other thoughts on that point, or we'll move on to a new question. One of our attendees asks, could Dr. Zhang explain what Bitcoin fork is? Zhang, can you explain that?
Can we do another webinar about that? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So, I'm kidding. A fork, the term fork originally comes from software engineering. So basically, when you are creating an open source software, and if the developers disagree about the direction of the development, some of the developers can choose to create kind of an alternative version of that open source software. So, for example, if we assume like if Office, let's say if Office is not maintained by Microsoft, but is an open source software, then you can say, all right, maybe Office, Office 365 is a fork. Your desktop version is another fork. So back to the case of Bitcoin, which is also a software, a fork is when only a certain portion of the community agreeing on how to update, how to change the parameters. So when a fork happens, like in 2017, the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, different users choose to download and upgrade in different forks, and then it goes back to the miners to determine which fork the coin they wanted to mine. So eventually, it's a very complex game theoretic dynamics to determine the outcome. But it seems to me that the fork that gained the most consensus support, like the real Bitcoin now, will be the main chain of this Bitcoin chain, and all the other forks like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, whatever, Bitcoin, a lot of other names, they gradually lose their market share comparing to Bitcoin. So that's what is a Bitcoin fork. It's a software update combining with the miner's choice about which forked coin they will mine. So it's like both financial and software.